Hello there. Chatbots and voice assistants are one of the most important tools in today's and especially in tomorrow's world. But who are the people behind them? The one that makes them work, the conversation designers. My name is Eran Soroka, head of marketing for CoCoHub.ai. In today's episode, we're traveling to Weston-super-Mare, England, to talk with one who really saw it all. Phil D. Hall, owner of Elzware, a conversational AI company. How are you, Phil?
Good morning, Aaron. Very well. It's a bit grey here today, but living up to the stereotype. But ready for an interesting week for sure.
That's always a good thing. So, how did you find yourself in conversational AI?
Well, that's a long sort of time ago, really, Aaron. My first interest in conversational AI was in 1982. My father came home with a borrowed ZX Spectrum, very, very early laptop. Well, not even a laptop, computer with rubberized keys and the ability to save it to a C90 tape. I mean, like really, really early days. And my father had borrowed this, brought it back home. I was 19 years of age. I'd had no formal training in computer science. I don't think it really existed maybe in those days, or if it did, it was very much higher education. So I decided to build something on the ZX Spectrum, Aaron, and I built a very basic chatbot. It said, "How am I?" If I said that I was well, then it went down one set of conversations, and if I said it was bad, it went down a different set of conversations. And I didn't have it for long, few months, and then it went back as a loner, Aaron, and there was quite a long gap between then and when I sort of got into professional development of chatbots, which started in 2002. So I've been running Elzware since 2002 now. I've been building chatbots since I was working at a systems integration company in the late 1990s. I worked at a company called Logica, who taught me all the software development stuff and so on. But the main reason, Aaron, and I know this sounds a little strange, that I'm involved in chatbot development is because I met one in a bar in a virtual world in 1997, 98. Yeah, I was studying anthropology and I was doing an ethnography in a virtual world rather than going to Costa Rica. And I was trying to work through this sort of Dungeons and Dragons kind of world. And I met a chatbot in a bar and it was terrible. It was really terrible. So I sort of kept that in mind, and when the opportunity came to move into the business, I did. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's a unique way, a very unique way of getting into things. What's the bot or project that you're most proud of out of these, 20 plus years?
Well, I think there's been an awful lot of fun systems which we've built, and an awful lot of very sort of tedious kind of customer servicey kind of systems that have been built over the years, Aaron. So Elzware, when it was set up in 2002, was on the back of some work which we had been doing in Postbank in Holland. We did a customer services bot there, working with the contact center. In those days, the systems were called email response management systems, ERMS, and they were doing processing of email and then converting that into a structured and routed system which worked across the call center. So I think there's a lot that have come past me. I think on the basis of what the systems that have made me most proud, it's potentially is the TeachBot system, which we did in English reading and writing at the end of the noughties. So this was sort of 2008 to 2010/11. This was using proprietary software, not open source software, which is what we use nowadays. And it was giving kids in secondary school in the UK the ability to ask any question about anything at any time, and then to be able to distill that information down so that teachers or parents could see where their kids were failing or not. So very, very early days. Unfortunately, the financial crisis took us out, and a big restructuring, a governmental restructuring of education, Aaron. So I think that one makes me potentially most proud. But the one that's had the most impact is the I Am Echoborg show, which has been a piece maybe we'll come back to it a little bit later, but just in a nutshell, it's a piece that generates discussion about people's attitudes to artificial intelligence, and chatbots and conversational systems are sort of the front end of that, although there's so much that is going on with people being driven by Facebook and algorithms and YouTube, or literally being driven, by somebody in an Uber who doesn't really know where they are or who they're going, or really, I mean, they're just being driven by an AI system, Eran. So yeah, we're living in interesting times,
Yeah, I'm taking you back a bit because you said that there was a gap also for you between starting and making it professionally. But other veterans I know in this industry call it the dark ages, the day that after, you had like the early chatbots of the 60s, 70s, early 90s, early 80s. And then until Eliza, not Eliza, sorry, until the Alice at the 95, nothing happened for years. Can you have elaborate on why it took so much time for the technology to catch up?
Well, that's a really good question, Eran. I think the drivers for artificial intelligence, before the last winter, was very much about mapping and working out academic constructions of what is or isn't conscious and working out how to code those. So we ended up with notions like perceptrons, and some really major arguments between academic institutions, higher education institutions, internationally. So there was work that was done in and around people's attitudes in the 50s that automation, as in robots, were going to take over everybody's jobs and nobody would have to work for a living. And clearly we've realized that was all sort of hyperbole, really. That was a hype cycle, an early hype cycle. So I think the space between when Weizenbaum created ELIZA and when professional organizations like some that still exist, the company that I work with was called Brightware, that was doing email response work in the 25 years ago, West Coast American companies like Creative Virtual, really veteran players. Still working in this marketplace right now, bringing in expertise, working with their own proprietary software. I think the dark ages was about delivery mechanism, I would say, more than anything else, Eran. The ability for us to have good quality chatbots, and the term chatbot and conversational AI, or even AI more broadly, is so fluffy and so contested and so full of marketing hype. It's almost impossible to sort of define what that is, But the good quality chatbots that were being built 20 years ago were actually knocked off their course, partly by financial blips where budgets disappear off with the large fintech companies. But my perspective is that it was taken out by social media, and that when the big social media companies came in to start with, the people who were at the top of the big companies, who aren't necessarily those that are most technically adroit, really understanding what's going on in the world, were like, oh, it's easy. We'll answer a question on social media and it will always be true and that will be the end of it. Yeah. And then, this morning I noticed on a news feed that I think Twitter are now moving into a position where they're going to validate some bots, on Twitter as being more or less acceptable in the world. So I think that the dark ages for me was because there was no business reason for chatbots and conversational AI. Where we are right now is we've got big data as an entity, as a thing that people are looking to use, and part of that is to look to use that in chatbots and conversational AI. Whether that's the right methodology or not is a different question. But I think the dark ages was actually, it was about academic funding being pulled, Eran, other focuses being put, and here we are in a full circle where academic funding underneath machine learning and deep learning is just off the scale, and the people that are coming out from these kind of new courses with sort of data science and so on, are just being hoovered up by startups. Yeah.
Yeah, I know some of those. Meeting a chatbot in virtual reality is definitely one of the best stories I've heard. But out of the things you've created later, what is the most awkward or funny thing that happened to you with your chatbots?
Well, I had to dig back a little bit here, Eran. I think the most awkward. I'll tell you two tales. Yeah, we have early days of the IM EchoBorg system, and we were doing testing for it. And the IM EchoBorg system is where we use a human being as an avatar. So the human being repeats the words of an AI. It's sort of Milgram kind of experiments, 1950s experiments. You have a person in a white coat and they tell somebody who's come into the experimentation chamber to put an electric shock through somebody who's passed out, yeah, because they're not answering correctly. It's built in that kind of environment. It started off sort of 6 to 8 minutes long in Berlin at a conference called The Emotional Machine in 2016. And it's now grown, and our next show is going to be for an international conference with heads of countries taking the interview steps, which we're hugely excited about. And I'll be able to explain more about that maybe another day. But in early testing, when we had multiple levels of AI control of humans going on, Eran, we were doing some testing locally in Bristol, which is around the corner here. And the system started talking to itself. Yeah. So there is a structure underneath the system which is quite flexible. It's not built against algorithmic constructs. So it's not a black box, it's a glass box or maybe a grey box. You know, it's a hybrid construction, which isn't particularly fashionable right now. But as we were going through this test, the system started talking to itself. And myself and Reglander, who's my colleague in the development of this, were both racking our brains. What had happened? Yeah. And we realized that part of the anchoring which we were using to create the unique user ID was an IP address, and the network we were on was dynamically reallocating IP addresses every single connection. Right. So, but the story that I'd like to share with you, which I think just takes you back right into, you know, sort of prehistory, and I think there's an important point to stop on for a moment, is that there's so much hype and there's so many people who are so passionate about trying to build good quality chatbots nowadays. And I do think that there's a bit of a blind spot, because really good quality chatbots were built many years ago. Yeah. And I think there's some reflection possibly that needs to happen. So back in 2009, something like that, a system was built for a train or a company in the UK. Yeah. It was driving people around their website. It had an avatar on the front of it. It responded in real time. You know, it wasn't built out Flash or anything like that. It was a cool thing. It was a good thing. And what we had then, as we have now, is that people would be rude to the bot. Yeah, they would be offensive to the bot. So in discussion with the ladies who were running the marketing department there, we agreed that if somebody was rude to this bot, it would force them to apologize. Yeah. So this is a chatbot like 12 years ago that was, which, I mean, have you ever come across such a thought, Eran?
I've saw actually one of my former colleagues created a bot that if you insult the bot, it insults you back. It like stands for the bot's right. Yeah, it was called, I think, Henry the Mean. One of my former colleague Jason. It was amazing.
No, that's a great fun thing to do. And you know, and I think that kind of bot's rights is again a different conversation for a different day, possibly. But what happened was somebody phoned up, made connection with this chatbot to ask a question, to get some information about part of this rail network. Yeah. And the system said, when asked, are you a chatbot? The system came back and said, yes, I'm a chatbot. Yeah. The person then completely forgot that, had an argument with the chatbot, yeah, got offended and made a complaint to the head of the rail network. Yeah, this came through to me as the head of operations at the company that I was working with at the time. And I was like, it doesn't seem reasonable. So I went in, found the log, found out what had happened. wrote a nice email coming back explaining what had happened and so on. And the person who, angry of wherever it was that this person came from in the world, went from like, that's the worst thing I've ever seen in the world, to like, that's the cleverest thing I've ever seen in the world. I honestly thought it was a human being. So yeah, awkward, I think, fits in there, Eran. Yeah.
That's fantastic. What else is what is the most important thing you talked about? We're living in interesting time, which is surely right. I couldn't agree more. What's today the most important thing for a good chatbot, a good quality chatbot?
Yeah, I mulled that over a little bit. I think for me, the bits that I get, because I do test some of the chatbots that are coming out from sort of Dialogflow and TensorFlow and these kind of structures. And I think there's three things that I'm seeing that really need to be handled. The first thing is error capture. The systems are not being built with kind of normal full lifecycle software development methodologies, testing, quality assurance, regression testing harnesses. Yeah. If you have a methodology which is built on you shovel data in, and then if what comes out the other end is appropriate, you tick a box and move on, then you're sort of handicapped a little bit on the ability to be able to do formal unit testing, use case testing, and so on and so on. So there is that, what are the tools at hand, Eran? But I think error capture is the main thing. I've chatted to 2 or 3 recently, well-known companies, well-invested companies as well, and I've just immediately hear just complete drops being ignored, unusual variables appearing out from nowhere. I mean, it's not like people are trying to get GPT-3 to dance, which is going to be an interesting sort of revision of what happened with Tai potentially. But so error handling, I think, in conversation, proper testing, I think, is probably the most important thing for me. The system which we work with has full regression testing harnesses which run against the entire system, sort of soup to nuts, with all sorts of various stuff. I mean, but we've been doing it a long time, so you'd expect our system to be sophisticated, for want of a better term. But I think the main thing that the chatbots of today need, or maybe the marketeers need, is a little humility. The kind of, there's a revolution in HR, there's a revolution in revolution. Yeah? And it's like, now hold on, most of the systems are very simple. They're like IVR level simple. They're interactive bot responses, yeah? With like not much more than buttons. So let's just take a deep breath. Yeah, I think the Amelia folks, IPsoft, I watched one of their pitches recently where they were talking about the future, and one of the quotes was something like, the growing divide between basic chatbots and conversational AI agents. Yeah. Now, all these words really mean nothing. Yeah. I mean, if you go back to Erwin van Loon, the guy who ran chatbots.org for many, many years and then decided to step away, a real visionary fella. And there was hundreds of different terms that identified what was or wasn't a chatbot or a conversational AI. For me, I think what we need in the system right now is we need an acceptance of not the RASA levels, because I think they're hype. Yeah. I think we actually need to keep it much more simple. Foundational level 1 chatbots are an interactive bot response. You want something that is like an EchoBorg level conversation. We need different terminology, Eran. But how are we going to make that happen, fella? It's going to be difficult.
Yeah, I really believe in simplifying things like that. But you're right. So much complicated technology behind this. What else does Elzware do? Elzware, sorry.
So Elzware has always been a pure play. We've always built conversational interfaces. We've fought for the rights of the market to be taken seriously. We've done quite a lot of work in avatars and voice recognition as well, Eran. So I gave a talk last week, actually, on Thursday, to Brum.ai. So this is Birmingham. And they have a hub there, Aston University. And I just talked about avatars. I talked about avatars from the mid-'80s, up to right now with the kind of metahumans and so on, So
we also deal with avatars, as you probably know.
yeah, absolutely. I think the what Elzware does is three things. We build hybrid conversational AI systems. So if people have realized that what they want is not possible with certain simpler methodologies, they come to us and we look to build it. We do consultancy work, help so the sort of smoke and the mirrors, or help people with kind of RFID requests for information, or sort of pitch documents to try and get the right companies in the building. So we do consultancy work, and then we train people. We quite like to build a system and then train people with our technology, which is in part about design. But I think probably if you and I were going to start again from scratch and have a similarly interesting and diverse conversation, it would be about what kind of structures are in design. Because 20 years ago, when Elzware used to employ a lot of people, relatively speaking, right now it doesn't. It's an association. It's very lean. We used to have content people and technical people. So there was a technical developer and a content developer, and the two people had a formal social/scientific relationship between the two of them. But that's all up for grabs. Yeah, Elzware builds, we consult, we train, we have a lot of fun, we do crazy ass stuff, Eran.
If somebody else want to do crazy ass stuff at the chatbots, conversational AI, and today it seems like a booming profession, where would you recommend those people to start?
Well, I think there's two things that you can do. You could open up a box with a system which allows you total visibility and control, something like Pandora bots, which is doing well. Lauren Kunze, Steve Warswick, and the broader people at Pandora bots. They've got a system where you can see exactly what you're doing, but they're building really good and interesting relationships into front ends with rapport. And then they're taking on the big companies like Facebook, taking on Blender bots, and good for them. Yeah. And I think that's a good method going forwards. And the Alice system, which you mentioned earlier on, which is the heart of the Pandora bots, has been trained, at least in the UK, as part of sort of FE, further education and higher education. So I think that's a good place to start at. The system which we use, which is called ChatScript, I think that also it's a level more technical, gives you scalpel level controls, but I wouldn't recommend it for the faint of heart. Yeah. So I think that if somebody is interested in how to really create something which is more software than sort of statistics, then that would be a good line. But I think the new players that are coming on, I think your company is exemplar in here, Eran, where you're able to do something which is relatively low code or no code. You can think about dialogue. You can think about where social science and behavioral integrations, can fit together, but also sort of see where what you're doing could be seen to be ethical or not. I think giving people that kind of quite straightforward sort of view of how things fit together, it opens up the discussion. Yeah. And as long as people appreciate that, reinventing the wheel isn't necessarily going to be helpful, we just need to take a deep breath and work out where we've come from to see where we're going to. We should be in good shape,
So, where are we going to? Give me one forecast that where you see it going.
Well, I think the area that I'm enjoying working in right now is multi-language stuff. I think, I think take an area like South Africa, in South Africa, there are 11 major language types. Across Africa, the continent, thousands. Take even something just down to sort of accents and so on across the UK. The difference between somebody talking a harsh Glaswegian and somebody talking like a flat estuary English, and the ability for those things to be recognized effectively. I think there's an interesting line there going forward, Eran, which will be about trying to democratize and open up the voice part of the equation here. And there's organizations like the Open Voice Network, which are part of the Linux Foundation. So I sort of volunteer and am involved in the media and entertainment part of that. Because I think, if we had a position where people could all have access to good quality healthcare, education, information in whatever language, and this wasn't just a bubble, built on sort of, young male American voices and data constructs, then, potentially we've got something which harks back to the early days of the internet, I mean, I think the piece that I'm most interested in at the moment is the application of functional linguistics within the analysis and understanding of user types. So I don't think people even know what all the tools are yet, Eran. I think people just need to let's go back, let's see what we started with, let's bring that up to date, let's get some proper standards in place. Yeah, let's make sure that people who turn up and promise the world when really they're just faking it, let's move them out the way,
Yeah. That's a great couple of insights from you, Phil. So first of all, thank you very much, Phil, the whole owner of Elzware.
You're very welcome, Eran. It's a joy to chat to you early doors on a Monday. I feel primed for the week, fella.
You surely do. And for everybody listening or watching, go check out CoCoHub.ai, where we help you and everybody create bots with a human touch for voice, video, and textual chatbots. So thank you again, and have a great day, great week. And thank you. Take care.